Exactly. So far we've looked at, okay, here's what I need to do. And now we're going to start looking at, here's what I have. You're going to continue to peel that layer back. You've drawn a mental picture of what you want as far as remote working. And now you need to start to look at how you're going to get it done and take inventory of what you've got. So it's a good idea to kind of evaluate or audit your hardware in terms of laptops and desktops and monitors and firewalls and things like that. Um, all endpoints need a certain level of IT to make them able to work remotely correctly in a remote working environment. You can't simply just switch on remote access and assume that everything's going to work fine. This requires a new or different setup in many cases, even if you have, if you have a few people working remotely, you may still need to do something. Um, if we go back to that scenario where my client moved their billing department to work remotely, they had to repurpose hardware. So in this particular organization, layoffs occurred and they took the hardware that those individuals were using and repurposed those to the billing team so that they could easily take hardware home. Because that their role previously was working on a desktop and that is not easily portable. Okay.
Right.
So you're going to make some assessments or some um, analyze that a little bit. There are a lot of moving parts with regard to your hardware. You're also going to evaluate your software in terms of applications, remote licensing, remote configuration. You're going to identify those mission critical business applications that are not remote enabled. And it's very possible that you have those in your organization. Many of the core business applications like payroll and time tracking and accounting are very often not set up for remote access or a remote workflow. So if you've got a process whereby people turn in time, you need to evaluate what that process looks like with social distancing. Um, and this might require a new or different setup in many cases. So don't assume that a cloud application is remote ready either.
Sure.
Cloud applications will also have to be adjusted for extreme remote access to be able to handle more remote access load. Um, when you're looking at software that your team needs, you need to know if it's hosted or if it's on the server or whether it lives in the cloud. Um, are there regulations that dictate how you access that information? Um, is that a limiting factor in your remote work plan? Um, in another remote working scenario, we worked with a client that leveraged a dictation tool, and that tool worked flawlessly in the office. It was installed on the professional's workstation. It allowed for speech to text in their primary application and had the benefit of a nice, industry specific dictionary. It was fantastic. However, when they work remotely, that's just not available. The technology just doesn't work that way. So you need to be aware of any limitations that you might encounter too, because you don't want to be surprised with that.
Sure.
Um, you also need to look at your services in terms of bandwidth and security. And we aren't just referring to your organizational services at this point. When you're contemplating remote work, you'll necessarily have to rely on assets in your team's home, maybe even personal assets. So, are you planning to leverage personal computers or mobile phones? What kind of malware exists on these devices? Are they being protected from viruses? Um, so you're starting to peel back and look at what you've got to work with. And you need to plan to shore up those gaps. When you're looking at services, know that you're connecting your business network to your team's home network. So you need to plan to manage security on those machines potentially. Um, you need to prepare for the massive increase in the remote workload. Many companies' networks are set up for very limited remote access, and you could get overwhelmed um, with the new workload. So if your current system is set up to include only a few workers on nights or weekends, you'll need to assess that capability. And it's possible you'll need to add resource to that function of your network.